Two comments. One, I have a sense of deja vu because I think we've done this before. And second, John, you're a very hard act to follow. And after that speech, I'm not sure what else we've got left to talk about. But let me welcome our panelists to the stage. Please come join me. John, Gajen, Vivek, Mukesh. So our challenge is now to solve 1.9 billion people's issues in 45 minutes.
Okay.
And if you need to really dream, now is the time to dream, because that's what it's going to take. So maybe starting with you, John, as a continuation to what you said, give the audience a little background of your history with India. Like, how did this come together, and why was it important to you?
Well, interestingly enough, my history with India started in a unique way with my history with China, to where I developed, because of my Wang Laboratories background with Dr. An Wang, a very great relationship with President Xi, Jiang Zemin in China, about how could he use technology to change his country's future. And he asked me to outsource manufacturing of high tech at the high end to his country. And he said, if you do this, we will be better off and you'll get my infrastructure, which he delivered on. And over time, I began to watch China evolve. So I'd seen this movie before, and that was a bet I made, first big bet as CEO of Cisco in '95. And I watched China begin to move further away from inclusiveness and the ability to work together with others to their own nationalistic focus. And I'd already started to focus on India as the second world headquarters. But when Prime Minister Modi came to power, I have a lot of weaknesses, but boy, I'm pretty good on talent and trends. And he caught my imagination, not as a good leader, but a leader that could change India. And I think over time change the world, and we said that. And so it was literally the opportunity that I had to partner with Mukesh on this, and make no mistake, he's the brains, he's the operational builds, he and Gaurav on it. And I'm their coach and their background on it. But we began to see a digital India that all of a sudden, working closely with the US, we could change the world, and to the benefit of every citizen in every country. Most people thought we were dreaming too far. I think we're dreaming too little on it, and that's actually happened. So it was a chance with people that I love and really make a difference on, to have a vision that very few people could anticipate, and yet we did it together, and we're just getting started.
And so Mukesh, just given what we're hearing in the news and what's happening in the world today, where is this relationship? Where do you see us, and where do you think it goes?
Well, I think when you look at the current, I call a generational shift taking place in the international order, India is in a very precarious position because it's a country which is rising, 1.4 billion people, growing economy, but also has a challenge of finding jobs for 1.2 million people on a monthly basis, which are coming to the workforce.
That again, 1.2 a month?
1.2 million a month.
Wow.
And it has an open relationship with with Russia, a stressful relationship with China, and I would say a relationship with Europe, which was mainly a colonial master, has been tepid for time being. I think with the US under Prime Minister Modi, you have one leader who has been able to push, starting with Obama, down to President Trump, then to Biden, and then back to President Trump. He was the fourth leader to meet with the president, very constructive meeting, and basically the momentum on driving the trade between the two countries is going to pick up. They put a vision document of 2030. The trade has to go from 200 billion to 500 billion. They're talking about a trade agreement by fall when the president goes to India. And more important is on a technology side. They're going to collaborate from quantum to AI in every aspect. And these are the two countries which do more joint military exercises than any other country in the world itself. So India's role is getting enhanced in the Indo-Pacific. India's mission to create an economic powerhouse is getting bigger and better. I think we will have some turbulence because you have a president which is trying to drive an agenda which may not use so much diplomacy. And then you have India which has to look at, for example, tariffs. You know, India has been called a tariff king. And the objective is to bring tariff down to zero. That's the request. But how do you basically bring down to zero when 60% of your labor force works in the farm? And if you don't protect that, then you have a major social revolution taking place. So I think overall, I would say the relationship is fantastic. We will have turbulence, but there's enough maturity between the two leaders that they can manage this.
Vivek, let's talk some numbers really on what's happening on the ground. What you're seeing happen in terms of investments, what you're seeing happening in terms of, you're in Mumbai. Give a flavor of sort of how are people feeling? Like, what's the dynamic there?
Yeah, I think it's, firstly, thank you and congratulations, John. I think the relationship you've built for India and the US, along with Mukesh here, has been nothing shy of inspiring to a lot of people. I think people pick up the press and they see that this relationship is a strong one. It's built on shared values of prosperity, shared values of security, shared values of trade. Maybe a couple of quick comments on just the sheer magnitude of what India is doing today. First, we can't underestimate the value of just optimism and ambition. When you come to India, everywhere, you'll find people are optimistic, they're ambitious. If you think about it, at our current growth rate, between now and 2047, we are creating 3 new Indias. That's 3 new Indias will get created between now and 2047. That's the rate at which the economy is growing. And those Indias are going to look very different than the Indias we have today, right? They look very different. I think thanks to AI, thanks to some of the other technological revolutions we're seeing, the way health services, the way education services, the way lots of social services will get delivered will look fundamentally different. If you take a short-term view between now and 2030, we're going from about $3.5 trillion to $5.5. That's $2 trillion of additional GDP in the next 5 years. Just $1 trillion of that, by the way, the additional 2 is going to come from domestic consumption. And that's big. India, another thing you've realized, India's shining star right now is services exports. We are a net importer today on goods. So we're negative on goods of about 280 billion. We export a surplus, 150 billion in services, and we have another about 80 billion in remittances, which leaves a current account deficit of about 70 billion, which, by the way, is incredibly healthy.
Small, yeah.
And the targeting now is to actually bring fiscal deficit down even further, which is actually very healthy for a country like India that's still consuming capital every day. With that in mind, sometimes people don't realize how large the services economy actually is. India today is the 4th largest services economy in the world. That's just after the UK, US, UK, and Ireland. It's just ahead of Germany. We believe that between now and 2030, India will actually become the 3rd largest. And you can imagine a services trade that means a lot of jobs, right? Very, very critical.
That's a big challenge, though, in the country.
Big challenge. I think the other thing I'd just say is just the investment landscape. Over the last 10 years, thanks to these efforts, we've seen about 420 billion come into India, right? And when you consider that 420 billion of just sheer investment, private capital investment in companies, as a result of that, you've seen 118 unicorns. And perhaps even more importantly, of that 420 billion, 150 billion has been in pure tech. FinTech, EdTech, health tech.
Which is building the digital infrastructure of the country, really. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Gajan, you are running a multinational. You have offices all over the world. Talk a little bit about India and its importance in your world and how you see that has developed over the last few years and where you think it's going.
Thank you again, and congratulations, John. Yes, so I've been involved with India since '93. and sort of similar journey, I think, in what, John, you talked about. But yeah, I sort of see, if I think of it through the lens of tech, I've seen India go through, I'd say, at least 3 phases, if you will, right? There was the early phase of enablement, back office support type, from maybe 91 all the way through to 2005, thereabouts. And then around the 2007, 2008 crisis, India took on a bigger role where it became more part and parcel of the implementation. It became more of a strategic partner to many of the enterprises.
From just being a cost arbitrage.
From cost arbitrage to now really, as the work needed to move to a place where it could be delivered with, in a more cost-efficient manner, India started to take on a bigger role. And then since, I would say around 2015 or thereabouts, India has shifted in terms of purely from a talent perspective, having the ability to go beyond just being a cost arbitrage or even a strategic partner to actually being more of a scale partner. Now, as those shifts have occurred, I think a couple of interesting things have occurred. India has gone from having purely a tech talent pool to then learning the domain and understanding the domain, and now becoming quite deep in technology, across the board. And when you put those things together, if you kind of think of that journey of 24, 25 years,
Yes.
India now sits at the very, very nexus of what comes next. And so, tying that back to where we are, what has been really interesting for us at least is we have made this shift from India being an enabler to a supporter, and we actually now start to think of it more as a scale partner. And in this next journey, if you kind of think about our next 6 to 10 years of Hitachi, we really think of India as an innovation hub for Hitachi.
Not as a market?
Sorry, I'll come to that. In addition to a market,
Yes, quite a few people live there,
Yes, and the region of India has elevated as of this.
Purchasing power is up quite a bit.
Purchasing power as well, and it's fundamentally shifted to being both a innovation partner, a scale partner, and a market. And so in Hitachi, we now focus on 5 regions. India is one of them. Right. So that's been the shift that we have seen, and we truly see a tremendous amount of opportunity. And hopefully start to solve some of the labor challenges that we
So on this sort of few comments that we've had yet, so I think for the audience, it's to appreciate that the size of the economy, the mood of the economy, mood of the population is all trending very positive, and it's really meaningful, and there is real business to be done.
Now, you're setting me up on that one. India is going to be the #1 economy in the world, period. This is a fact unless they misexecute. All the demographics are going that way. It's going to be the fastest growing economic engine in the world. Its startup engine is finally kicking into high gear. You're seeing a country that believes and is optimistic about the future. They will have the highest standard of living increase per citizen in the world, and will execute. And if we do this right, India and the U.S. can team together to accelerate both economies and standard of living across the board.
Vivek, you think #1 economy in the world?
In 20 years.
There's press here, so.
Yeah. In 20 years, India will have 1/5 of the world's working population. I mean, that's demographic. You can call it dividend. We're concerned about the demographic left behind issues, but this the sheer magnitude. 1/5 of the world's working population will be.
So that's, if you look historically, that's an important indicator of growth. But my next question was going to be, what happens in the world of AI and automation? And what role does India play? What opportunities does India have? And what's the threat to India? Maybe, John, you can take us there first.
I'm going to start off with just a small note of caution. This morning, you all were kind enough to let me be in on the India panel group with about 12 really good startups. I hope you invest in them, and maybe you'll let me do in a couple of them. But on the one hand, they were excited about what it means, because the #1 nation in the world right now on new IPOs, India.
Yeah.
And remember, just 10 years ago, there weren't IPOs, much less tech startup IPOs at all. But there was almost a hesitation about, we don't see enough AI startups gaining the traction, the overall approach, and you could sense just a little bit of confidence issue. We forget that India does not have the startups to steal from. Most of our startups here in the US, they steal from talent of the major hyperscaler players. They steal from my prior company, steal from other startups. And I mean that in a very positive way, the talent dispersion. So I think they're going to be the key force for AI evolution overall, but it'll go a step at a time. And this is where I really like what the US and India are doing together is one of the 5 things that Mukesh can articulate better than I can. Number 4 is trust, i.e. technology, working together on it. So I think moving faster there, getting the funding. What a lot of people don't see is you were one of the few firms from the venture capital world investing in India looking back 5 or 7 years ago. Now everybody's going. If you have money, you have a great education system, 1.2 million engineers a year graduating in India, 660,000 in the US. You can do the math as quickly as I can. So this is where I think India does control its destiny, but we've got to have the courage to execute, and you've got to have government who really believes and enables that as well.
You know, we've had some conversations in the last day and a half or so. We've been here about AI and what it means for geopolitics, what it means for nations, what it means for culture, all of that stuff. And I think as this plays out, it's going to be a challenge for the country. But Mukesh, talk a little bit about the startup nation and the kinds of companies that are being developed there, the companies you meet that are trying to come to the US. And I'd love your thoughts on it, Vivek.
Yeah, let me just answer the previous question, then I'll come to the one you asked. You know, we have roughly around 40 million Indians who live outside India. And their net worth is almost 50% of the GDP of India at the moment. And that shows that they're highly successful. When you look at US, we have around 5 million Indian Americans, roughly 1.5% of the population, and they generate 6% of the GDP. Yeah. And basically, what I'm trying to say is, yes, as Vivek mentioned, that 1/5 of the workforce was going to come from India, we are seeing a very interesting trend. For example, Israel reached out to India after the October 7th attack and said, we need workers. And Prime Minister said, no issue, and basically opened the line for workers to go to Israel, even during the wartime. Then we got a later request, we need 2,000 IT workers. Open the market for that. We just got a request from the current administration as to, can you figure out a way to bring in 10,000 medical doctors to US? Because in the, 1 out of 8 doctors in the US today is Indian. Yeah. And so what we are seeing is a trend of highly skilled people migrating out of India.
Is that good for India?
Well, I think yes and no, both. Yeah. Because, you have basically roughly over $100 billion worth of remittance goes back to India. Yeah. And they support families, they support the community itself. So what I'm trying to say is the trend I see it is India will become a global workforce as we move forward, and they'll focus more on the highly skilled arena itself. But to answer your question on the second part of the question, we are seeing the phenomena of global capability centers in India. Mm-hmm. Roughly there are around 1,700, and we expect that number to go to 3,000. 60% are US companies. Every chip designed today takes place in India. Every chip design. Basically, 300,000 designers just designing new chips itself. But more important is the IP production taking place in GCC Center. You look at Qualcomm, which is a very highly technical company. 50% of the IP is being generated in India. Yeah. You look at IBM, the quantum computing. Mm-hmm. Most of the research is coming out of India itself. So what we are seeing is islands in GCC centers which are leading world-class R&D. Now, is that percolating into local culture?
So the challenge there is another, see this world of sovereign AI, and one of the things that people are selling is they're going to build capacity for the world, right? What does build capacity means? Data centers, GPUs, next version of Blackwell, whatever that is. And oh, we have cheap energy. India is energy deficient. That's a challenge. And you're disagreeing, Vivek? We have another point there?
Well, I think India, the flip side is India's manufacturing has been a disappointment.
Yeah, it's basically small scale.
It's been small scale. If you look at it, though, there have been 3 areas of real brightness.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to understanding India's endowment, what India's great at. So number one, we don't have to go over this, but the IT services and BPO,
it's been the best.
We had the engineers. As John said, we have the engineers, therefore we have the endowment, being able to serve the world.
Right.
That's one. Second is pharma. Been a real bright spot.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's because India has the technology, they have India understands chemistry. India understands chemical reactions. India actually builds its own equipment for these chemical reactions. To be very specific, if you get down to the details at the molecule level, we're good at that. And actually, we're better at that than China, better at that than anybody else. And so and so we're able to produce. Third, we're great at, and for the similar reason, chemicals. And so these 3 industries will continue to be very large-scale exporters. If you just flip that around for a minute, since we talked technology, right? From a technology perspective, if you just took all alternative investments in India and you took all tech investments, that 150 billion I referred to, and you treated it like a single asset class, it will actually be the highest performing asset class. Okay, there are a couple
for
of
investors,
stats.
for
investors,
yeah.
Tech investments. It has a 1.6 to 1.8 DPI, which is very important.
Very good.
It has
by the way, please also tell us why.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, it's a good question. It has a weighted average IRR of 28 to 30%. Very healthy.
Yeah.
Okay, and therefore net dollars. So the concern around, and most of these businesses, some of them are obviously domestic focused, but most of them are actually exporting. So you have a natural dollar hedge. And the reason, if you look back at the outperformance of VC or private equity-backed tech firms, specifically there are 5 areas where they outperform. And you can literally understand where investors and boards spend their time on these companies. The first is they outperform on just obvious on revenue growth. But not just revenue growth, quality of revenue. In other words, the customers they go after are some of the most, if you will, the stickiest, most important customers in their own industries, and they focus a lot on actually improving revenue and quality of revenue. The second you'll find is that 80% of private equity, growth equity, or venture-backed firms do their first M&A deal only after the investors come in.
Yeah.
Okay, and that could be domestic M&A or cross-border M&A.
Yeah.
The third is the pace at which they grow exports is fastest. In fact, it is almost 3 times as fast as their non-investor-backed peers. They grow exports faster. Part of that is, of course, exports are a healthier form of revenue. It is also hedges you against the rupee depreciation. And there are, of course, the quality of earnings and profits are that much better.
India, and also I'd say there's definitely been improvements in corporate governance and access to public markets, and all of that has been great. Gajen, what's your thoughts on all of this? And as you think about, when you said you have an innovation lab in the country, how does that play out?
I think, so while I agree with sort of all of the positive aspects of what India means to us, I do still see, even with GCCs, for instance, Mukesh just touched on this, there needs to be a shift in how GCCs are leveraged by companies from outside India with India. Because I still think that, even as recently as a month ago when I was there, there's a misalignment. The GCCs, most of the GCCs I've touched, tend to be still viewed as a scale partner rather than an innovation partner. Now, there's innovation going on. However, it's disconnected with the market need, right? And so the business isn't as engaged or as deeply engaged with the GCCs. And I think this is a problem, or it's something that needs better alignment. Because the moment you can do that, it starts to drive a lot of what Vivek is talking about, because all of the exports and all of the outbound work that happens in India becomes a lot more aligned with what the market needs, or markets outside. So India for India, perfectly fine. India for the world, I think there's this great opportunity to better align the needs of the market with what's being innovated in India. It's not a problem with talent, it's not a problem for expertise or domain knowledge or even funding at this point. It's it's an alignment with the needs of the market that needs to be better structured.
And is your thought here that because you're so far away from the markets you're trying to serve, you don't understand them? Or is
think
it
that
more you have a culture / image that you haven't changed yet or trying, or is it some progress of that?
I think it's in a way, it's both. I think outside India needs to start to look at India as a business partner rather than there's still an element of India as an enabler or a supporter of the journey rather than a strategic partner in the journey, if you will, right? And then India itself, right, we still have this challenge of leaning in and strategically leaning in. Now, I've seen a lot of change in the last maybe 2 years, John, as you touched on. The startups that are coming out of India, unbelievable, right? And it's not just AI or deep tech. I'm seeing robotics, factory automation type startups, even quantum. In the last trip, I met 2 quantum companies that are far ahead than anything I've seen even within Hitachi, right? And so I think the capability set is there. If we can just line it up properly, I think it could be explosive. I think that's the opportunity and the challenge that we face.
John and I've invested in a few. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, our minds think exactly alike. We need to go on the road together because we can finish each other's thoughts. How many of you are investors in the room? All right, so let me give you the math. The two companies I've invested in that were in India and we came to the U.S. with them, or the leaders were established in India. One of them, Safe Technology, already has a 10-to-1 return, and Uniphore has a 100-to-1 return. And so this is where I think the highest returns will come out of the startups in India. What's been missing is that we haven't generated the hyperscalers or the larger players, and that just takes time in terms of the unique approach.
Yep.
But if I were an investor, I would not only double down in India, I would double down twice in terms of the opportunity.
And we are, and I think what we don't talk about much here is the companies that Vivek said are serving, or you said were built for the domestic markets that are actually, some of them, I would say at scale that is surprising to most people. Any thoughts you'd like to share with the audience here?
Yeah, actually, I think somebody else made this comment earlier today about being born AI.
Yeah.
It's a bit like being born EV. Just the entire mind. When you're born EV, you don't think engineering.
Yeah.
You think design, you think software, you think assembly. When you're born AI, you just think differently. So I think when you are born in India to solve major domestic opportunities, frankly, the ability to touch, feel, produce a business model, execute that, go through it just allows these businesses just do a lot better.
And you can't export a model from outside into India. It's very unique. The market needs are different. The economics are very different. But we have companies like Zomato, who our companies do business with, that are technically as skilled and as forward-leaning as any hyperscaler here. And the reason I brought it up is this is now, what, $35, $40 billion market cap company?
Yeah.
But it could be $100 billion in 2 years.
You look at companies like Zepto that are nipping on its heels. I mean, the sophistication with which they're using machine learning and advanced analytics to run dark stores, to fill your basket orders before the scooter has left the shop is just out. I mean, 10 minutes.
So I was with another very interesting company today that's building infrastructure, Gen AI infrastructure, data center infrastructure, and then putting Blackwell chips on top to sort of sell. And I was asking, how sophisticated is the Indian market? Like, do they even understand how to do this? Like, yeah, a few startups, but outside of that. And he was like, surprisingly, so people have been using AI systems there for years. They're very sophisticated, as sophisticated as any part of the world. And these are not startups. These are financial services, then retail, and using it for customer targeting or for fraud prevention. He says the market needs are as sophisticated as you would have anywhere in the world, which was surprising to me.
I think it is for the very top 10% of the conglomerate. So if you look at Tata as an example, Chandra, he has an AI strategy across all aspects of his business. One person has responsible for AI, but he goes from hospitality to airlines to semiconductors on it. And the most sophisticated network in the world is what Reliance built with Ria. I mean, it's amazing, Gio, how powerful that network is. But that's the exception. It's a little bit like France used to be. When startups started to go in France, we had trouble with French high-tech, French companies accepting the innovation and the starting. It took a number of years to get it going. I think that's a natural part of the
There
process.
is, and the big difference now, John, I think, and you are on the ground, you probably have a much more informed opinion, is that the technology startup ecosystem is so confident and is growing so fast that the older generational companies in India have no choice but to embrace these things. And they will, that forcing function is either going to make them survive and be what they are or be gone, as it's happened here. Now, in India, the change function is harder because you have a lot of different heuristics to kind of break through. There's no inheritance tax. There's a lot of things that stay within the family generationally, and that's why you have these massive conglomerates. But that will also change.
But McKinsey, I don't want to steal your thunder here. I think you all have said that 60% of the Fortune 500 disappears in the U.S. and around the world.
It always does.
I agree with that number in terms of it. So any country whose established core business doesn't evolve, I think will be in trouble.
Yeah. One area that I think people don't appreciate much, and Mukesh, you may have a point of view, is on India and this push towards space technology. Mm-hmm. What is that? Give us a little insight into where that is and where that's going.
Well, the two things which happened there when India's mission to Mars showed what you call is the frugal engineering India has. Yeah. The cost of the mission to Mars was less than the cost of movie Gravity.
Yeah.
And so what we are seeing is as soon as India opened its space to private sector, we have roughly around 250 plus space startups. And we have a couple of them who are attending here. I think Dhruva Space is here, and a few others also. Yeah. What we are seeing is, and these are some very fantastic innovation they're doing in a very cost-effective manner. For example, one space company I know which has set up and it's not just about rocket launches. It's about leveraging technology. For example, one company in Bangalore has set up a platform which monitors all the thousands of debris in the space. Mm-hmm. So as you're launching, you need to make sure that those debris don't come in the way itself. Another space startups has set up a very cost-effective way of doing all the data analytics up in the space and sending the final product down, rather than getting the data down, then you do the analysis itself. So what we are seeing is in the space startups, Indian companies are being leveraged now by the US Defense Department, by the NASA also. So we see the trend coming up very sharply.
Another touch point between US and India is around these technologies. And I think the startup maturity it's kind of funny because I made my first investment which had an Indian office in 2001 or something. And the CEO called me and said, I need you to do an event with me in Pune, in India. I said, what for? He said, I can't hire people. I said, why? He says, because their parents won't let them work for me. So you have to come and give me credibility. Sure. I think that's the biggest change that's happened. There's an aspirational generation. There's a very confident generation of young Indians that are trying to sort of go out and change the world.
I know, Sumant, you're an amazing moderator, and as such, you don't participate as a panelist. But with my colleagues' permission, share with us a little bit why you all bet on India so well, and what have been some of the key milestones you've accomplished?
Well, I mean, part of it was because we knew it. I grew up there, so I kind of had insight into what works and what doesn't. And our first investment in India was drifting off an investment we had made in the US. This is prior to March. A little company called Confinity that became PayPal. And we understood financial services well because of that. So we invested in India's leading financial services company. In fact, Vivek's a common friend introduced me to, which was Rahul Khanna introduced me to that company 18 years ago. So we've been doing this for a long time in India. And it's been a super lucrative market for us. But the new nature of businesses coming from India are the ones like you talked about, that are building products and services or products that are world-class, leading technology products out of the country and are competing globally and have aspirations to be globally competitive and globally successful. And those are the ones that you see all of the attributes, Vivek, you talked about in terms of You generate money in dollars, you'd hedge the Indian rupee depreciation, which is always a challenge because it's 5 to 7% a year. That's an issue. You're building a product that's technology, so it's intellectual property, so you have high gross margins. You're building the kind of businesses that we've grown up investing in the US, that we see the multiples and outcomes that we desire. And we'll see, I think in our database of companies at March, we have about 300 or so these types of companies that we're watching. Some are in the single digits of millions of revenue, some are in the tens of millions. Very few, but there are some that now are in our portfolio as well, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's been an evolution. It's been a great market to invest in. I'm going to transition a little bit the conversation and talk a little bit about leadership. Yesterday, Mike Milken was talking about look at the tech leadership in the US and look at the Indian diaspora. And you look at people like Chandra at Tata, who are considered probably some of the world's leading CEOs, not just India's. What is it, John, you think about that culture? What is it about this that now this is possible? Because when I started here, very few are far in between. An Indian would walk in with a company, and my partners would say, so I get it, you're the CTO, where's the CEO?
Yeah, I think that's natural for any group as we first come to America. And remember, almost all of us are
Immigrants
on it. When I first came out to the Valley, several of the Asian groups that represented companies here asked me to come and speak, and I was kind of confused. Why did they ask me to speak? They asked me to speak because I was from Wang Laboratories. And understanding how the transition was going to occur. But I think there are two equalizers in life. One is education, and the second is technology. And if you combine that with democracy, which I think in the end wins on innovation and entrepreneurship, the power is huge. The numbers are breathtaking in the US. Out of the top high-tech companies, half of them are led by Indian diaspora. Out of my own portfolio, not by design, just I tried to get the best companies, over half of them are led by Indian diaspora. So it's the education system, the hungriness, the young population, and a tremendous drive to be successful that's coming together. And that's what pattern recognition is about. So that's what I personally see.
And all three of you as well have worked with, or I worked as leaders in large companies. What do you see, what's changed?
We call America a melting pot, and we say India is a salad bowl, where you're in one country but maintain your identity, your language, your religion. And early on, as kids, we learn to work cross-culture. We learn to speak multiple languages. And more important is the systems are so obstinate that you have to find a solution. So you have to keep on driving, keep on driving. Nothing comes easy. I mean, from school admission to going through tuition processes, an IIT admission, which is very onerous process. I think early on, you go through the process, and it kind of brings that sense of hard work and discipline. And once you go through that, it becomes easy coming to the US corporate environment, and you can work cross-culture, cross-country, and be able to work harder than anybody else itself. So I think it's a combination of attitude, the environment you brought in, and definitely a lot of smart kids out there.
But by law of numbers, you'll have more smart kids because you have more people.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small point, and not to rain on the Indian diaspora parade, but this is the cream of the cream.
Yeah, it is.
You know, if you saw there was a chart up yesterday, I think Mike Milken or someone had put it up, on PISA scores.
Yeah.
India did not participate in that.
They did not, yeah.
And they did not because our PISA scores are among the worst.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even make the chart.
On average, yeah.
Our educational outcomes by the third grade, by the fifth grade are atrocious. And I say this to you because remember, you're seeing the reflection of India's brightest, best educated show up on the shores. By the way, I think this is actually one of the areas where the US has got it right from the 50s and 60s. The immigration policy targeted engineers, it targeted talent, it created a window of opportunity for people to come in and build great lives here. And so you ended up with some of the brightest Indians leaving the country. It was a brain drain. Of course, now we have more Indians who are going back. the
But the opportunity set has changed in India. So
Yeah, and so therefore there's no, at some level, perhaps it's not surprising, English-speaking, well-educated, grow up in a democratic and messy system.
Yeah.
You learn how to navigate things and just get along. So not surprising. You know, one thing I'll just say is, which is a little different, the US and India are very, very similar in 3 or 4 ways right now. One is both have sort of a hyper-nationalism drive. Right-wing populism is actually on the rise in both countries. The second is you have concerns around elitism and therefore inequality, right? You have concerns around old institutions not being fast enough. So things have become a little more anti-institutional. We're looking for the leapfrog. You know, to some extent, there's also concerns about anti-pluralism. In other words, that one voice is the right voice, one way is the right way. I think this, interestingly, gives rise to a huge opportunity for tech, which is known for transparency, known for leapfrogging, known for actually moving beyond these institutions that are metastasized. And so in some sense, there's a national consciousness that suggests that technology actually will, in some ways, allow people to overcome the concerns they have around the one voice anti-pluralism.
So I'll give you a funny story. We were in, Malika and I, my wife and I were in business school 25 years ago, and the Minister of Technology, or IT from India, came to see the school. And he says, you know why India's done so well in the technology? Because I'm the first IT minister. Before me, there was none. Now I have a secretary and undersecretary. Everything will slow down. We'll take care of you. So
I gotta think about that.
Yeah. So maybe, John, we always end with and we'll have the panel opine on any last thoughts, but from you, top 3 predictions for 2025.
I think this will be the year that AI moves from being something people do pilots with and strategy on to mainline across all major companies. I think India, contrary to some of the concerns, will actually, with the US, set the pace for AI for the future. I think that's well under our control on it. And my only comment is I think we've got to dream bigger. And one thing I love about Prime Minister Modi, and there are many things about it, the minute he achieves a goal, he raises the bar very quickly. Leadership is a must for a country to lead in technology.
Right.
So those would be my predictions. I think it will drive the stock market, assuming we don't have some geopolitical issues that go out of line. So I feel good about the second half of 2025. I think the first half, we're probably going to be on a little bit slower start.
For all our portfolios, I hope you're really right. Really hope you're right.
I hope so.
Good, Jay.
I'd agree. I think industrial innovation, AI and robotics, in terms of sort of short term, is going to be big from India, both for India and outside India. My one concern for India is the services side of business, IT services, I think will be significantly disrupted with this whole new generation of agentic AI technology. And I just don't see enough reskilling, upskilling going on right now. And that always is a concern. I think there's other areas that are growing, but this is the one that I worry about.
Talent development, human resource development is the challenge in front of the government, which, by the way, is only getting worse, not better, thanks to all of this. Kesh?
I'll give from a geopolitical perspective. I think when you start claiming that we need to take over Greenland, when you start claiming you're going to take over 51st state of Canada or Panama Canal, it sends a message on a global basis that the current order is going to shift dramatically. And once that starts shifting, you'll see global alliances also shifting. Today, Europeans are saying, how do we get less dependent on the United States? You have, in Asia, people are saying, do we depend on US security to have that order coming through? So I think what we see is a dramatic shift taking place quietly while we see the noise in Washington, D.C. on a global basis. That is going to impact trade, technology, and people's movement. And you will see nations becoming more introvert, trying to become more self-sufficient rather than becoming a globalist itself.
So that's the role you have to help navigate, because that's why US-ISPF exists, at least for the US-India corridor. And I think it's a very important organization to foster the relationship between the two countries.
I actually think it's the most important organization by far.
I agree.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the geopolitical distance, so I have 3 quick comments.
Yeah.
You know, I think India's geopolitical distance will impact its capacity to trade with many people. And actually, India's geopolitical distance has narrowed with so many countries in the last 2 years. It's narrowed. Of course, we've always had a narrow geopolitical distance with Russia. We have it with Iran. We have it with Saudi. We now have it with the US. You're seeing this, and so in a bilateral trade world, not a multilateral trade world, it becomes easier for countries like India to strike bilateral relations as opposed to having to be part of a pact. Okay, I know there's some concern about the new BRICS version and how they might trade, but honestly, India will not align itself with anything that actually threatens its sovereignty or threatens its independence.
Interest.
And so actually, in a world of bilateralism, India is more likely to thrive. In a world of multilateralism, India was sort of left out.
Yeah.
So that's one. The 2 things I think will evolve over the next couple of years. One is import substitution. That is big. So this is not about tariffs. This is about producing India's own semiconductors, which will be through partnerships like John and Mukesh are leading, producing its own medical devices, own medical equipment. So that's one. And there'll be a huge amount of investment that goes into India simply to substitute imports that are critical for domestic consumption. And the second, of course, is trade. And India will have to change its stance on trade. Its traditional stance on trade has been high tariffs for a simple reason. The belief is that international trade doesn't produce jobs, it takes away jobs. I think the experience of Vietnam, Thailand, South Korea proves otherwise.
Yeah.
And so India will probably revisit its own understanding of the relationship between trade and domestic job creation in a way that hopefully is symbiotic with the US.
Interesting. Well, thank you. I just will end by saying, look, India is a fairly large country, fairly old culture, very old culture, but actually quite a new country in the context of where the world is. And a lot of things have to be figured out, are being figured out. It's a very exciting opportunity set for what we do. It's a very exciting place to be in business. And I appreciate all of you being here and doing this with us. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was good.